My name is Dan Strollo. Technically, I am the executive director of a nonprofit that's called the In Control Family Foundation. And we do hands-on closed course training as well as what we refer to as community engagement. You'll occasionally see me on television talking about defensive driving, distracted driving. I've done some seatbelt work at the State House trying to get that law changed. And just generally, our goal and our mission as a nonprofit is to make the roads safer for all of us and try to reduce crashes and ultimately keep more people alive that way. So one of the things I always like to point out is that the vast majority of crashes are driver error. You're going to hear me use the term crash. You shouldn't hear me say the word accident very often. And we try to encourage people who participate in our program, people in the insurance industry, people who have responsibilities related to vehicles, to refer to things as crashes, because quite simply, this is an accident, but the vast majority of things could have been avoided. And whether it's the driver that you're responsible for, yourself that is the person who made the mistake, or someone else, or just something proactive that wasn't done before you got on the road that day, the vast majority of these things, and according to the CDC, it's somewhere in the 90 percentile, are driver error. And so we really want to try to change that mentality. And what I also like to always point out is that the United States actually used to be the safest place in the world to drive. Back in the 70s, we had the lowest death rate per capita compared to any other country out there. And today, as you might be able to see, not that you can zoom in on this graphic too far, we're generally down at the bottom of the barrel. We're about 40th, 42nd place pretty regularly out of the top 48 countries. So most of these other countries focused on driver education. We have focused on technology, which is not a bad thing. There's a lot of good technology out there. There's some technology out there that I don't think is as great, and we may talk about that today too. But ultimately, there's benefits to focusing on technology, but if you don't train people how to use it, you get yourself in trouble. And so today, my goal is to talk to you guys a little bit about the landscape of what goes on our roads, give you some tips that hopefully will make you and some of your folks better drivers, and then talk to you about some of the training that we do and some ways that you can take advantage of that through your organization with grants and other things to reduce your exposure with both workers' compensation, commercial insurance, and whatnot. So with that, I should mention that our program as a whole, our mission is to help all drivers, but we really do have a passion for young drivers. New drivers, it used to be under the age of 18. In fact, now it's jumped from 18 to 25. That age range has the highest death rate per capita of all the driving age ranges. And car crashes is the number one cause of death for those folks. That used to be under the age of 18 was the was the highest death rate. But what's happened in maybe the last 5 or 6 years with technology and with other influences, the expense of getting your license, people are waiting until later in life to get their license more than ever before. So you're seeing a lot more kids wait until they're over 18. And you're, in fact, occasionally hiring young drivers that you thought because they were 22 and 23 and had this great driving record, you might not have noticed that they actually only got their license a year or two earlier. So these are just things to be aware of. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter how old you are when you get your license. That new period of time, as you're an inexperienced operator, you tend to crash at a much higher rate. So even if you wait until you're in your mid-20s to get your license, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're so much more mature, you're less likely to crash. A lot of it has to do with the experience that these people get. And going through our training, we've actually been studied in a number of different groups. And today, the Registry of Motor Vehicles actually keeps track of our graduates. Those that go through the program and participate get a little notch on their it's called the Driver Skills Development Program field on their license. And there's savings out there that they can take advantage of from insurance companies because of the reduction in crashes. So what we tend to find is new drivers see 70% fewer crashes and the severity is less. And then it varies by experienced drivers. We have commercial companies that came to us because they were going to lose, they were being put into the high risk pool, or CARS as they call it in Massachusetts. They were going to lose their regular insurance, and they took advantage of training with us. And actually one of them, that was about 6 years ago, they haven't had an incident since. And so what I can tell you about this compared to, when I describe those other countries that are more focused on education, when you get your license here in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is known as one of the more advanced states, your road test is less than 5 minutes. If you were to get your license in Germany, that road test is going to be more like an hour. You're going to be on city streets. You're going to be on highways. At one point, they'll take you to a private area. They'll have you put the car into a skid and prove you can regain control. If that was the case here in Massachusetts, probably everybody on the phone here would be working from home permanently, because it takes a lot of effort to learn how to control your car that well, especially early on in your driving career. So those are some interesting things about how things compare. The core of our program is a hands-on course. We use big open spaces. Right now we're training the old South Weymouth Naval Air Station. All of our instructors have been training in this arena for a long time. Almost all of our instructors are licensed race car drivers. Now, that doesn't mean that we're encouraging your employees or yourself or teenagers to become race car drivers. It just provides them the expertise to be good at what they do. They can practically have their eyes closed and figure out what somebody did improperly when they were controlling the vehicle, and we can guide them there. And our curriculum's pretty consistent. There's been some changes. We've added some distracted driving pieces and filled in the blanks on a few things with technology. But what we've been doing for over 15 years now is something that's been going on in those other countries that enjoy far lower crash rates for a couple of decades before. And just again, to compare it to traditional driver's ed, we're not looking to replace that. For those of you who've got young family members in your own family or an extended family, there's certain benefits to traditional driver's ed that we are not looking to replace at all. What our goal would be is to see new drivers just before they go for their road test. And we want to make sure that we can help them there. But the reality is a lot of kids now don't go through traditional driver's ed, so we'd want to see those people either before they go for their road test or shortly thereafter, just to help them avoid that first crash. Now, the hands-on program that we offer right now in the wake of COVID, we are primarily offering the program in South Weymouth. We do try to get out to Western Mass once in a while, and for those of you on the call that might be representing people out that way, we would definitely want to chat with you, because we try to organize it around when people want to work with us. We previously were working up in North Andover, and hopefully we'll be able to return up there. Amazon bought the piece of property that we were using, and so we're trying to work out a deal with Amazon. And then there's some places on the South Shore that we've been to. The good news is there are programs that we can do coming to you, where we would offer some of the program at your facility or nearby. But most of what we do is a half-day program where people travel to us. You can't replicate a lot of the stuff that we do at your own facility just for safety reasons. So we'd want to have people come to us. And South Weymouth is, again, in the wake of COVID, the traffic's been very, very light. So it's really not too big a deal for most folks, east of Worcester to try to meet us there. And then just to see the spaces that we use, this upper right-hand corner is the actual piece of pavement that we use in South Weymouth, which is the old Naval Air Station. This other one is the space that we used in North Andover. But we try to make do, our classrooms are these outside areas. We have trailers, and when we worked at Worcester Airport, we were actually in baggage claim with people, giving them training. But the reality is our classroom is this big open space, this road that we put people through and into emergency situations, but they have a lot of room to give them the space to make a mistake and move on from there. What is ABS? So the majority of you know what it is. It is anti-lock braking system, and it's been mandatory on cars since 2012. Prior to that, it was an option on cars, and so what we always tell folks to think about is when you get into a vehicle, we want you to determine if, in fact, it has ABS brakes. When you first start the car, you're going to actually see on the dashboard whether or not there are ABS brakes on the vehicle. And it's a little light, which I think is, oops, it's not on this screen. It was on a screen prior, but it says ABS on your dashboard. Typically, it's red. It can be orange. And that light is to indicate whether or not the vehicle has that braking system. Now, a lot of us have purchased cars at some point in our lives, and I imagine most of the folks on this call have had a car for a while. We did not quite know how to use ABS brakes. Prior to, or if you had a vehicle that does not have ABS brakes, you're supposed to practice something called threshold braking. A lot of you refer to it as pumping the brakes. We don't like to use the term pumping because it doesn't necessarily describe what you should be doing with those brakes. If you do not have ABS brakes, threshold braking means that you aggressively get on the brakes, and as you feel the brakes start to lock up, you want to take the pressure off the brake pedal just to the point where the wheels start rolling again, and then you want to put all the pressure you can back on that brake pedal. And then if you feel them start to lock up, you do the same thing. That's called threshold braking. Pumping the brakes kind of gives this impression that you're just kind of wildly pumping the brake, pushing it, taking your foot off, pushing it, taking your foot off. That's really not what we want you to do because it's going to take you forever to stop the vehicle. And what we want people to understand is how ABS brakes work and what the benefit is for them. The big thing that ABS brakes do is they take that threshold braking concept and automate it. So they don't allow the wheels to lock up. But the benefit to that has far less to do with your ability to stop and more to do with your ability to stay in control of the car. By knowing how to utilize your ABS brakes, just literally aggressively putting your foot on the brake pedal and keeping your foot on that brake pedal, the benefit that it provides for you is you can still steer. You can bring yourself and steer yourself to safety in an emergency. A lot of people don't realize that. The fact that those wheels continue to turn instead of locking up. If you were to be in a vehicle without ABS brakes and you aggressively step on the brake pedal, all four wheels are going to lock up. And when you turn the wheel to try to avoid whatever you're heading for, you're going to continue to slide in the direction you were previously traveling. You can't steer. But if you have ABS brakes, it doesn't take any extra thought. You don't have to worry about threshold braking. You can just steer yourself to safety. That's huge. This is one of those things that I mentioned earlier as far as technology. ABS brakes is amazing technology. We just never taught anybody how to use them. Most people, and maybe some of you, didn't realize the benefit was your ability to steer. Their first experience with ABS brakes was the winter when they put their foot on the brake pedal and they felt it pulsate and thought something was wrong with the car. And so what we want to have people do is actually experience it. So when someone participates in our program, and this is whether it's a 15-year-old child from New Hampshire, we've had 94-year-old students, we train a lot of the police departments in Massachusetts, and certainly a lot of different types of vehicles, trucks, vans, cars, pickup trucks, and whatnot. Everybody has to do a highway speed panic stop where they're traveling between 50 and 60 miles an hour. And we tell them when they get to these first set of cones, they have to aggressively slam on the brake. And what's interesting is when you approach that, and we call it the brake in the box, when you approach this and you have to slam on the brakes, it's intimidating. You slamming on the brakes at a speed of 50 to 60 miles an hour is not something you do very often, hopefully. Hopefully you've never had to do it, but occasionally it does happen. And in an emergency, you need to know how that car is going to behave. And what we find is a lot of people, regardless of age, regardless of driving experience, when they slam on the brakes at 50 or 60, they freak out and take their foot off the brake. And as a result, they run into the wall of cones we've set up in front of them. This is a good time for me to mention that we do use our own cars for this. We actually go through tires every 7 days. We go through brakes every couple of weeks. This is not something we encourage doing in your vehicles regularly. When we do classes for commercial drivers who are driving vans, pickup trucks, box trucks, specialty vehicles, we can introduce their vehicle for this drill or a couple other drills. Some of them we'll do at slower speeds, but we had a company come through that was a uniform company. We had them bring 2 of their vehicles, and the owner of the company was there for this because he wanted his people to see it. And we took the vehicle, we had it both vehicles were half full. They took all the uniforms out of one vehicle, put them in the other. So we now had an empty vehicle and a full vehicle, and we had them do this panic stop with the full vehicle with the empty vehicle first, and then with the full vehicle. And it was well over 100 feet further for it to stop. And so for people just to appreciate the impact of weight on their ability to stay in control of that car and how much further it takes to stop. All of those are learning opportunities, and this one is none different. You go through this drill, we tell you to slam on the brakes at the cones. People, they depress the brake, the seatbelt locks up on them, the vehicle's making noises they've never heard, the wheels vibrating, everything about it is foreign, and a lot of them take their foot off the brake. But what I can tell you is 100% of the time when we repeat this drill, and every drill that somebody does with us is repeated, 100% of the time when we repeat it, they stop without a problem the second time around. This is something where once you've experienced it, you're no longer intimidated by the way the vehicle behaves. And we've had well over 30,000 graduates of this program. I honestly don't go more than a week or two without hearing from somebody, whether it's through Facebook or an email or even just a phone call, who participated in our program sometimes as much as a decade ago, and then found themselves in an emergency and thought of themselves sitting next to our instructor and how they were able to stay in control of the car. It's really something that I wish everybody could participate in, because talking about ABS brakes and me explaining this to you today, you might have picked something up that you didn't already know. But feeling the G-forces, feeling your seatbelt lock up, hearing those noises, you're just not entirely sure how you're going to react to it until you've actually been through it. So next up, where are your hands supposed to be on the wheel? I recognize that we all learn to drive at some point, and we're taught, many of us, 10 and 2. Unfortunately, it's been a long time since a vehicle was designed for 10 and 2. In fact, none of, early on, there were some vehicles that actually had their steering wheel set up this way. But for the last 40, 50, 60 years, if you looked at the steering wheel of a car, you will see that if you rest your thumbs across that rail that goes across, it's actually called the thumb rail, your hands are going to end up at the 9 and 3 position. And this is the ergonomically correct way to have your hands on the wheel. It's more comfortable. If you can get in the habit of keeping your hands there, you'll actually find that it's more comfortable for a long drive to do that. But more importantly, it keeps your hands away from this airbag. And now that we've got the airbag in place, your hands, even at 10 and 2, can get hit by the airbag. We've seen AAA promoting 4 and 8 a little bit, which we don't understand because it doesn't necessarily give you much control of the vehicle. 9 and 3 gives you the greatest steering capabilities, and it keeps those hands away from the airbag. And in case you didn't know, those airbags deploy at a speed somewhere between 250 and 500 miles per hour, depending on how old your car is. So if you were that person who felt compelled to have their arm at their hand at 12 o'clock and lean back with the radio way turned up, you're going to punch yourself in the face at somewhere between 250 and 500 miles per hour. So that can do a lot of damage, even at slow speeds. If you get yourself into some kind of crash, when that airbag goes off, it can hurt you. So we want you to get in the habit of having your hands at 9 and 3. And we have a drill called the Slalom, and it's going to talk to our drivers about where their hands need to be and the impact of speed on their ability to control the vehicle. So when we do this drill, we set up a group of cones and we have the driver go in and out of the cones. And at 25 miles per hour, just about everybody has no trouble. They can travel through these cones and they're able to stay in complete control of the vehicle. And then we start increasing their speed at 3-mile-an-hour increments. So maybe it's 28 miles an hour, then 32 miles an hour. And what's interesting is before 35, everybody loses control. At some point, I'll come up with a better slide than that. They don't actually get upside down. But everybody's going to lose control of the car. And it gives us an opportunity to talk to them and say, hey, listen, on these back roads, when you're doing 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, even though the posted speed limit was 30, did you really have control? What were you going to do if an incident came up? How are you going to stay in control around that curve? We really want people to recognize that it doesn't take, it's just a couple of miles per hour. There are too many people, parents, drivers, ed teachers, police officers telling people, hey, you can go 10 miles an hour over the speed limit and you're probably not going to get a ticket. I'm not necessarily going to argue that, but 10 miles an hour is a big gap in an emergency. If you were going 5 miles an hour faster, even 5 miles an hour slower, or even 3 miles an hour slower, you have a greater opportunity to stay in control of that vehicle. So we always try to encourage people to drive the speed limit, but more importantly, recognize that just a couple miles per hour can still get them into trouble. The other thing that's really interesting about this drill is when we put people through it, we do all of our drills by having our instructors drive first. So we have that instructor in the driver's seat, and they go through that drill at a speed far greater than the students could do, maybe 40 plus miles per hour. And everybody bounces around inside the car, and it's an opportunity for us to talk about seatbelts. Because we'll say to them, hey, where would you be sitting if you didn't have your seatbelt on? And they're joking like, oh, I'd be in the driver's seat. I would have bounced to the back seat, all that. Well, you know what? We believe the purpose of the seatbelt is as much to help you from not getting injured in a crash, but actually more importantly, to help you avoid getting into a crash in the first place. If you don't wear your seatbelt, you're going to not be able to properly control the vehicle in an emergency. You won't be able to hold on to the steering wheel, let alone stay behind the wheel in that emergency. You can't use your feet properly if you're trying to brace yourself because you're getting thrown around the car. So we want people to wear their seatbelt, not just to avoid getting hurt, but to avoid that crash in the first place. And you might be sitting there saying, well, doesn't everybody wear their seatbelt? You happen to be living in the state that has been traditionally 48th place for seatbelt use. We saw a couple of bumps up recently where we made it, I think, to 42nd place, but we're still woefully behind the rest of the country. We are in the 70% of the community wearing our seatbelts, where there are states that, over 95% of people wear their seatbelts. And this is a really big thing with your employees, with family members. You might find somebody who's adamant that they don't need to wear their seatbelt. We train a lot of police officers. These police officers seem to believe that they might be getting out of the car to chase somebody. We have this conversation with them. How often does that legitimately happen? I'm a big guy. I can look these people in the eye sometimes and say, it's been decades since you've chased somebody. But they need to wear that seatbelt to arrive to their destination safely. And then if they need to get out and do something quickly, unbuckle themselves when they arrive there. But you really want it to stay in control of the car. And we've had a number of officers tell us, you know what, I've been in crashes in the past. I didn't realize I lost control because I didn't have my seatbelt on. They'll wear it going forward. So some of these things, again, we just want you to experience it so you know. The other piece of this particular drill I'll just pass on to you is most of us here, when we moved to New England or when we grew up in New England, we were told turn into a skid. That's a great thing to say, but it's a very difficult thing to appreciate when you're experiencing a skid for the first time. Turning into it, what does that mean? Am I turning left? Am I turning right? What does that all mean? When we do this drill, the rear of the vehicle, as you start to go faster, starts to lose adhesion, and you're turning back in towards the skid. And we're building some of that muscle memory so you know how to properly stay in control. The biggest thing I can tell you to help you if you're not participating in the program with us anytime soon, in an emergency, what we want you to do is look to safety. Don't start sliding towards a tree and look at the tree, because you will hit the tree. For whatever human reason, we steer in the direction we're looking. So we want you to look down the road. We want you to look to where safety is. And more often than not, you'll get it yourself under control and get off in that direction. But if you stare at the tree, if you stare at the guardrail, you're going to end up running into it. That's just how we work. All right. Tailgating. Let's talk about tailgating. Massachusetts has been #1 in the country for tailgating crashes for a long time. We don't seem to want to get out of that. One thing I'll say about Massachusetts is, while we do have one of the highest crash rates, Boston, Worcester, Springfield, often when they look at city crash rates, we're generally at the top of the list. We don't lose as many lives. We crash a lot more than others, but we don't lose as many lives, partly because of the traffic. Although, with COVID, in the month of April, we saw half the traffic that we saw the year prior, but twice as many fatalities. So people were driving a lot crazier without the traffic that we were used to. But part of the reason we were always known for not having as many deaths is that we had the traffic to contend with, and we have such great hospitals. So not every state has the benefit of their major cities having so many hospitals to choose from and trauma units to help people out. But let's look at this. Can you tell me what the safe following distance is between your vehicle and the vehicle that you're following? What I can tell you again was when I first got involved with In Control, it was going back a dozen years ago now. The Registry of Motor Vehicles licensing book actually did have the wrong answer. Mathematically, 1 car length for every 10 miles an hour does not work. But it is, again, what most of us learned, and unfortunately, some driving schools are still promoting, but it doesn't work. If you think about it and you try to judge distance while moving, that's a complicated thing to do. Also, what am I driving? Am I driving a pickup truck, a station wagon, or is it a Geo Metro? How do we judge that difference? But really, where the problem becomes is you cannot solve an exponential problem with a linear equation. The reality is, at 20 miles an hour, I might agree that 20 or 2 car lengths of a lot of vehicles would be plenty of distance between them. But when you get to go 50 miles an hour, 5 car lengths is not nearly enough. It takes exponentially further to stop your car the faster you're going. And so what we do is we get everybody in the class that we're hosting to agree to a safe following distance. And you'll see we tie a cone to the back of one of our vehicles. And we have our students chase the vehicle, and we offset them because both the students and the vehicles are pretty expensive, not to mention our instructors. So we offset them so that they're off to the side, and we have them chase the vehicle, and we tell them to try to keep the nose of the car up with this cone, and that at any second, we're going to slam on the brakes. And we want them to be prepared. Now, we've already taught everybody how to do a panic stop, so they know that they can stop that car faster than they might have actually realized. And we've had them agree. I drive this close to cars in front of me all the time, so this has got to be a perfectly safe thing. And we tell them, as soon as you see those brake lights, just slam on your brakes and let's see how you do. And we explain to them that we're going to grade them. So if they stop before the back of the car, they passed. If they stop right at the bumper, it's a fender bender, so we can make fun of our Boston accent. Anything beyond that bumper but not halfway is an ambulance ride, and anything further is a hearse ride. And when we do this drill, we have everybody participate, and at the end of the drill, we generally have about 70% hearse rides and 30% ambulance rides. We've had students get out of the vehicle in tears because one of the things that's kind of scary, you do the majority of your slowing down in the last couple feet of stopping. So you may pass the back of our car still doing 35 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, and they recognize they would have really gotten themselves into trouble. And a lot of people have been in crashes. And, you know, the opportunity that they're saying, wow, I'm driving every day closer than I need to. Some of you out there are thinking to yourself, well, if I give too much distance between me and the vehicle in front of me, I'm never going to get anywhere. Here's what we train everyone. We want you to leave 3 seconds of space between you and the vehicle in front of you. At 20 miles per hour, that probably is about 2 car lengths. But as you go 50, you're going to be far more than 5 car lengths behind that car. And yes, I do this all day long, and sometimes people pull in front of me. If I'm driving a half hour somewhere, I might have 4 or 5 people pull in front of me, and then I have to slow down to give that 3 seconds of space. So if someone pulls in and I have to give 2 seconds, over the course of a 45-minute drive, if I do that 5 times, I am now going to be 10 seconds later to wherever I was headed. So there's no excuse for tailgating. It does nothing but put you at a disadvantage if that person stops quickly in front of you. Now, assuming you guys have all been driving for a while, the reason you don't crash every day is that you look down the road. You're not distracted. Hopefully you're not playing around with your phone, and we'll talk a bit about that in a second. But you are looking down the road and making sure that there are no brake lights coming, that sort of thing. With newer drivers, they don't tend to do that, but there are other drivers that get themselves into trouble. People who are impaired, people who are responding to something. If you're running late for something, or if you're a police officer trying to get to somewhere quickly, you tend to have tunnel vision. And that becomes another situation where you don't necessarily recognize that you're following too closely for the vehicle in front of you, and you don't see those taillights and whatnot in the distance because you're so focused on the matter at hand. So things that we want people to think about as far as that goes. Backing up. Our general rule of thumb for all of you guys to avoid a backing up crash is to don't back up. And that sounds easy, but for those of you who have vehicles like vans that are in your fleet, it's difficult to back up bigger vehicles. And so avoiding it altogether is absolutely the first thing we want you to think about. But the reality is there are situations where you may have to. Now, vehicles are designed to go forward, all right? And I'll talk a little bit about how the differences are between going forward and backing up in a second. But if you can, when you arrive at your destination, if it's a van, you pull through a parking spot. If it's a car, you pull through a parking spot. You just try to set yourself up so that you can pull forward when you go to leave. If you find yourself in a situation where there are no spots that you can pull forward into, you want to actually back into that spot when you arrive at your destination. That is the way that we encourage people to take advantage of the fact that they got to their destination, they can see that nothing is in their spot, and that they should just back right into it, and then when they go to leave, they can pull forward and go out. You'll notice if you see workers' trucks around, sometimes they've got cones behind them. Oftentimes, those cones are not so that the driver will, they're worried about somebody coming around a corner and running into them. It's actually an excuse for the driver to have to walk behind the van and make sure there's nothing back there before they back out of a space. So a lot of companies, Verizon, Comcast, you'll see them do that, and that's a requirement of their safety department. The way we make this point to everybody is we take a vehicle and we have everybody, we'll have everybody watching. We might take the shortest person in the class and ask them to sit down behind the wheel. And we can then have them adjusting their mirrors and looking behind them. And we're going to ask them to adjust their mirrors in such a way that they can see a cone, a full-size traffic cone, that we put behind their vehicle. How far behind that vehicle do you think a cone is for someone to see it? Just like this cone down here in the corner, actually a little taller than that is the one we use, but for someone to see the entire cone in their mirror, they're looking in the mirror over the dashboard, how many feet back do you think that cone is? And think that number in your head. And then I'm going to go through with the rest of this presentation. We'll see what you get. So here's the problem you get into. Cars, again, as I said, are designed to move forward. You can see things directly in front of the vehicle, depending on the size of the hood and what you're dealing with, maybe 5 feet to 15 feet. We're averaging between 85 and 105 feet. And we do some things in our drill to make this even more dramatic to get the point across to everybody. But we'll have that person in the class, the shortest person in the class, sitting behind the wheel, and we'll put the cone down and it'll be 85 feet. Then we'll switch them out for somebody who's taller. But while they were switching them out, we'll have some of our instructors sit down maybe 40, 50 feet behind the car and get them to agree that they can safely back up. Luckily, we put a piece of wood behind the wheels so they don't run over our instructors, but we ask them if they think they could back up to it and challenge them, and we don't let them actually put the car in reverse. But it's pretty dramatic. You'll have people on the sidelines going, oh my God, how can they not see that person? We really want you to recognize this vehicle is designed to go forward. There's a lot of weight up front typically. That's going to make the front of the car sag. There's all these headrests as you look out the window. It's blocking your vision. The front window is only a few inches from your face. That rear window is sometimes multiple feet from you. And all that stuff. Think about this too. If you go forward and you let go of the wheel, the vehicle primarily continues to track straight. But if you were to go in reverse and you let go of the wheel, oftentimes, well, generally, the wheel's just going to cut to one way or another, and you would start to go into a circle. The car is not designed to go backwards. So we really want you to avoid doing it. If you do need to do it, we want you to go slow. Try not to even use the accelerator. Just have your foot hovering over the brake. And in a lot of cases, you don't even need to back up. If you missed an exit, God forbid, you go to the next exit, you turn around and come back down the highway and go from there. A lot of situations give you the opportunity not to back up, and especially not to back up great distances. The final drill that we put our students through, and this again is regardless of age, this would be something your employees would take advantage of or yourselves, is what we call the emergency lane change. One of the reasons we do this drill is it's a synthesis of everything that we've taught them so far. I mentioned to you before that the benefit of ABS brakes is this ability to stay in control and still steer yourself to safety. This is that opportunity to see how you would steer, what you would do. If I didn't tell you this, what I'm about to tell you, I don't know how you would respond in an emergency. If there was something that fell in front of you in the road, or you suddenly had to avoid something in the road, half of you on this webinar would probably just cut the wheel to the right or the left, and the other half of you would jam on the brakes and then try to steer. Those of you that were to apply the brakes first, you're going to survive. You're not going to necessarily hit that thing. But if you suddenly cut the wheel to avoid something, you lose control of the vehicle. You're going to throw the weight of that vehicle to one side or the other, and that's basically going to throw off the balance and throw off your controllability to the point where even if you do start to steer, you can't stay in control of the car. So this particular drill is built around the concept that we want you to go in, we want you to dramatically get on the brakes, and then steer yourself to safety. When you put all that weight on those front wheels by putting on the brakes, you can still steer and you've evenly distributed the weight. So when we do this drill, and I had forgotten I had this slide in here. This is something that is meant in some ways, and we really used to push this concept harder. SUVs built before 2012 do not all have stability control in them. The newer SUVs we feel a lot better about, but I'm sure there's a healthy percentage of you on this call that are operating SUVs. we caution you, if it's an older SUV and you don't have stability control, it can be very dangerous if you get yourself into trouble. And if you don't apply the brakes, these are the type of vehicles that roll over quite easily. If you get yourself in an emergency, you have to steer around something, we really, you have to have those brakes on first. And a lot of SUVs, even just, 10 years old, I can get up on two wheels at 25, 30 miles an hour just by turning the wheel quickly. And so we want you to be recognizing that. Newer SUVs with stability control, that uses that ABS brake system to actually strategically lock up the brakes or apply the brakes in such a way that it helps you avoid actually rolling over the vehicle. And so that's something that's important to understand. But as we do this drill with our students, we have them go down that runway and we tell them, we're going to blink a light on the dashboard and tell them which direction to go. So they're either going to travel around this way or around this way, left or right, and try to get around these cones. And so we have these lights set up on the dashboard. At the last second, we tell them what the safe direction is. And then if you apply the brakes and steer, you'll make it through it. If you just steer, you're going to end up losing control and spinning out. And if you actually apply the brakes but don't steer, you're just going to blow right through the cones. So we want them to experience that. So this is, oh, there we go. Leonard, I'll get to your question in a second. This is some of the stuff we do in between drills. So we have pieces of tire nearby so that we can show people what wear is on a tire so they know how to check. The biggest thing with wear and tear on a tire is a day like today where it's beautiful outside. Hopefully it's beautiful where you are. Bald tires operate fine. The traction is pretty decent and you'll get going where you want to go. But if it rains, like it did a couple of days with some of these thunderstorms coming through, you're going to hydroplane quite easily. The tread on your tire is to push water out of the way. So if you don't have enough tread, you're not going to shell the water and push it off to the side the way you need to. That is something that most drivers don't appreciate. And you guys have employees driving company vehicles, I'm sure. So in those cases, you can certainly have somebody who's in charge of the tires, but it would be good if your employees know to look for this and they can point it out to whoever's maintaining it. But a lot of you have people driving their personal vehicles for work, and if they're driving around on bald tires and they don't recognize it, that's a potential liability, and especially some of these folks who are picking up clients or picking up other people as part of their job. So that's something that we're going to go through. We're going to talk to them about impairments. Part of the goal is for people to appreciate how important it is to stay engaged while driving. And so if you're under the influence of drugs, there are a lot of people using marijuana now in driving. We've done some studies. We're doing some research now. There's a Fox 25 news story that we did where we got a bunch of people high and took them driving. And it sounds fairly hilarious. I'm not going to lie. It was a little funny to watch. But they all thought they were better drivers when they were high, and they all ran into everything once they got high. They were slower in some cases, which is what they all thought they would be, but they just bumped into everything. You lose spatial awareness. And so that industry has tried to promote that driving while high is not a bad thing because it helped them with the medical marijuana side of things. But we're here to tell you it's not a good thing at all. Alcohol, of course, we've known for a long time is a problem, and even sleep deprivation. We work with a lot of younger drivers. They don't get nearly as much sleep as they should, but drivers of all ages have that same problem. And you go a couple days without a good night's sleep, you might just as well be drinking behind the wheel. In fact, I joke, if I had my choice between somebody who's high, somebody who's drunk, and somebody who's actually asleep behind the wheel, I guess I will take the higher drunk person versus the person who's asleep. But regardless, we don't want people doing any of those things. Finally, I want to talk to you guys with regards to, we do a texting and driving drill. I won't bore you with the specifics of it here, but you are all professionals. We all as human beings are hopefully being smart enough to know we shouldn't have that phone in our hands while we're driving. There's now new laws around it that are to prohibit it. But a lot of us don't appreciate how important it is not to use the phone when we stop at a light. And so oftentimes you heard that text message, you heard that ding go off or whatever the alert was, and you get to a stoplight and you think to yourself, okay, I can check this. And it might seem harmless, but what we're finding is some research out of Utah is that when you take yourself out of situational awareness, I try to describe that Knight Rider car. You remember the red light going back and forth all the way across the front of the car. Well, when you're driving down the road, your eyes are going back and forth and you're actually really engaged in your driving. when you get to a stoplight, and if you distract yourself, and it doesn't have to be a phone, it can be reading something that you had in the passenger seat. It can be playing with the dashboard. Our dashboards are more complicated now than they ever were before. You can do something to distract yourself, take yourself out of situational awareness, and then for the next 27 seconds, you're not completely engaged in driving. And in that time, somebody may be stepping off a curb to cross the road. There may be a bicycle that passed you. There may be a car coming into the next intersection. You're basically could be driving forward for close to 30 seconds without fully comprehending what's going on the road in front of you. They're finding a lot more crashes tied to people who were at stoplights, 2 or 3 stops back, and they distracted themselves and they just didn't get quite engaged and get back to situational awareness. So keep that in mind, and hopefully that helps you discourage yourself even from picking up that phone, because I think a lot of us did not think it was a big deal before that. So what the purpose of the training is to prepare people for all these dangers that they face on the road. We do it in a safe environment, and we want people to make mistakes. You guys all know learning by doing is a much better thing than just talking about it. We want them to make mistakes and be able to repeat it. Many of the drivers who go through our program can take advantage of personal discounts off their insurance. Their own, commercial policy discounts are a little different. Certainly, if you improve your rating and you don't crash as much, you're going to see benefits to it. But there are things that, as I had mentioned before, we'll occasionally have people who are going to be dropped by their insurance company, and we will work with them so that their insurance company doesn't drop them and they're able to save a fortune. And then there is in the Massachusetts Junior Operator's License, there's a piece where you can actually drive less time with your teen, and if you take advantage of our program. And frankly, whenever parents come to us asking us to sign off on that, we'd rather see people drive 100 hours with their kids than the 40 that the state requires, or the 30 that they let them do if they've done our program. So we tend to tell parents just stick with driving 40 or more, and we'd rather not see you just use us for that case. But keep an eye out for us. We're generally in the news fairly often. We try to do some things with the state and some partnerships with some other folks. And if you hadn't seen the little blurb that we have on Chronicle, we have that on our website, but that does a decent job of showing the program. We do other programs. We do school visits where we try to have people drive. We don't want to just go stand in front of the school and talk about safe driving. That's pretty boring, and I'm getting too old for kids to look at me and actually think that I know anything. So we put them in the passenger seat at their school, because we can't really use a big open space like we can on an airfield, and we teach them the importance of seatbelts. We teach them why it's important to stay engaged and why they should be reducing their speeds. And another thing, if you have kids, one of the things we've done in the past is sit out in front of the school and count how many kids are wearing their seatbelts going into the school. That will horrify you. It's something that I would encourage you to have your PTA do, or PTO, and feel free to get us involved. There's a lot of kids who aren't wearing their seatbelts. In fact, our percentages are generally lower than what we see for the state of Massachusetts. So I promised I would talk about grants. There's a number of different grants that are available. Our website is driveincontrol.org, and you'll see it on the last slide. We have a portion of the website that's driveincontrol.org/grants that goes into details about these different grants. These grants can be used for visits to your facility, where we would do the close quarters maneuvering training that we offer. That is not a training that does most of the things I talked about today, but what it does do is cut down on low speed crashes and gets people to focus on how important it is to avoid backing up, but how to do so when necessary. We give a presentation with it that's similar to what I've done today, but we prefer to people to take advantage of grants to go through what we call Crash Prevention 101, and that's the 4.5-hour program that we do, similar to what I talked about today, that takes people through the hands-on real speed things. Also, we would want to, especially if you have a grant paying for it, add the close quarters maneuvering, which is something we can do at our facility or at yours, depending on what makes the most sense. And we tailor these programs. We've trained for buses, fire trucks, box trucks, even tractor trailers. We've got a few things that we've gone through. And so we will make sure that we're tailoring the course to what your needs are. The reality is we're still going to do the driving. Even when we train the police, we train in our, currently we're using Honda Accords, because the physics is the same. And we've had drivers of all kinds of trucks, all kinds of specialty vehicles, question us, go through the training, then get back to us that we were right, working on it with the vehicle that we had. And we will introduce their vehicle for certain aspects but we don't want to do the wear and tear. There's a lot of wear and tear that takes place, some of which you don't notice for a while. We can tell you some horror stories, and I would not recommend you buy a Honda Accord that looks like it might have said In Control on the side of it, because we'll be turning these cars in about 6 months. The grants that I mentioned, we have the DIA's Office of Safety Training and Education grant program. That's a grant program that actually pays the full cost of training. It generally can pay for staff somewhere between 60 and 90, maybe even over 100, depending on what you needed for your training and how many people at a time that you can have go through it. The Workforce Training Fund Express program pays for a good chunk of the training, usually about half. And then that's something you can apply for today, and you'll actually get the dollars about 6 weeks from now. That first grant from the DIA, that comes out annually. Usually it comes out around this time. I should probably check and see if they've put it in this week. I didn't see it last week, but when that grant is available, you got a couple of months to apply for it. And I don't know if COVID is impeding it at all, but it is worth looking at. And then the general program from Workforce Training Fund is something that you can put in for a bigger grant. Usually you get a grant for a couple different trainings, and we could be one of them. And we're on the lists for all these organizations. There's an on-the-job training program. All these are on our website. But don't forget, there's local grants for nonprofits that may be out there listening to us or to me today. This is something you can take advantage of oftentimes. There's organizations that can help pay for it. We can help you find some of these organizations. There's federal grants that are available from time to time, and just private organizations that may want to help in your industry. We have some associations that have gotten together and sponsored people. If nothing else, we'd like you to proactively train your employees, because we find that to be the best way to overall reduce your exposure. But consider doing this as something that you would work with people who have issues. You can have the greatest employee ever, a plumber, a electrician, a salesperson, whatever their role is for you, a visiting nurse. They could be fantastic at that, but if they're struggling with their driving, let's address that as quickly as possible and head on. And this is something that people, there are times where people do not pass the training that we offer. Generally, it's younger people. Parents got all excited, sent them to us before they had even driven on their permit much, and we have to tell them to practice and come back to us. But we do have people who will come and they will actually train with us and then fail, and we just invite them to come back. There's no expense to take it a second time, and we'll work with them on what they need to do. And here's some of the recognition and endorsements we've received over the years. But maybe more important to us, something we call In Control moments, where we just have continued to get a lot of great feedback from past graduates of the program about their experiences. So I hope that today you learned a little something both about how to drive and about In Control. We would love to earn your business, and I know we're a nonprofit, but without doing the work that we do with commercial drivers, it would be difficult for us to reach as many teens and families as we do. So our website is here, my cell phone number is here, my email address. I encourage you to touch base with me with any questions you have, anything I wasn't able to answer today, and really consider training your employees. Come take us up on an offer to get yourself through the program, maybe take your family through the program if you've got people in your family you think could use it. But ultimately, we would love to work with your organization. We'd love to train your employees, and we'd like to save you some money. Thanks for your time today, and we hope to hear from you soon.